sometimes sticking to a tight budget can feel really complicated, as well as frustrating. But if you're looking to spend less on your sewing, then I have 5 super simple tactics for you that require very little effort to implement. And what is even more awesome is that each one will automatically help you reduce the environmental impact of your sewing. So stick around a few minutes for that. Welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 16 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge Me Made May. But, like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and I'm looking at the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. And I really hope you'll join me in this journey. Hi lovely one, how are you doing? I'm hanging in there, but honestly, I am exhausted. But it's okay, because it's time for me to take a little break from podcasting, although not from parenting. So this week's episode is the last new episode for a while. I'm taking 2 weeks off from releasing episodes entirely. And then, because my kids will be at home for the summer, and trying to work whilst they're around is a nightmare, I'm going to be re-releasing 4 episodes from the earlier days of the podcast. I'm picking ones that got a great reception when they first aired, and are ones that I still think about a lot and refer back to often. So if you found this podcast more recently and haven't gone through the archives yet, you're in for a treat. But if you've been around since the early days or have gone back through, these are episodes that should stand up to a re-listen. I'll be recording new up-to-date intros for each as I re-release them, so we can still hang out over the summer. And if you're travelling somewhere soon, don't forget to download some episodes of Check Your Thread to accompany you. I would also love to remind you, if you haven't already, please sign up to the free Check Your Thread weekly newsletter. I love keeping in touch with listeners through that medium, and I promise that every week they are short but sweet. You can sign up on the homepage of the website checkyourthread.com, just scroll to the bottom and pop your email address in. And straight away you'll get a welcome email that includes a couple of freebies. So let's just crack on with the episode, shall we? So this actually wasn't the episode I was planning to make for this week. I had something else in the works, but as occasionally happens to me, an idea bubbled up that demanded to be turned into an episode right away. It was probably all that talk of finances and sewing and sustainability that we were exploring in the recent miniseries. That combined with just feeling super tired and distracted at the moment. And I'm guessing that others might be feeling the same at this midpoint of the year. So if you, like me, don't have a lot of energy or brain space going spare currently, then this episode really is for you. The show notes this week are dead simple. I've literally just listed out the 5 tactics that I talk about in this episode, and then I've linked to other related episodes that explore each of the ideas further. So please take care of yourself, get some rest where you can. I'll speak to you in 2 weeks, and enjoy! Okay, I get it. You're probably tired. I'm definitely tired. Basically, everyone's tired. Sometimes you just want to be told what to do, and for that thing to be really easy to actually implement. I'm about to share some really easy tactics to save you money when it comes to your sewing. These tactics are so easy, they require little or no additional effort on your part to implement. Plus, they'll also automatically help you sew more sustainably. So I'm going to present each tactic to you, explain why it's easy, why it will save you money, and why it's more sustainable. Sound good? Okay, let's go. Right, tactic number 1. Finish a project before you start a new one. So basically, what I'm suggesting is to just work on one sewing project until it's finished before getting embroiled in another. That's it. You might already do this. It's usually how I work, for example. But I understand that for others, it might require a bit of retraining of your own brain so that you can get out of the habit of having multiple projects on the go at any one time. If that's you and retraining your brain sounds like effort, I promise that working on one project at a time actually involves less effort once you've implemented this tactic. It'll take less effort and thought to get going when you find some time to sew, because you won't need to decide what to work on. And it will take less effort to find and gather the bits you need to crack on, and less time and energy to get started, because there'll be fewer projects at various stages of completion clogging up your sewing space. So why does this tactic save you money? So technically, this isn't so much about saving money as it is about not wasting money. When you're focused on one project at a time, you're going to get through that project quicker than if you put it aside for a while to work on something else. Therefore, you're less likely to lose momentum or interest in your project, and you're less likely to lose any of the pieces, all things that put your project at risk of never getting completed. Reducing the time between having the initial idea for your project and getting it finished means you're more likely to still be really excited about actually wearing it. By helping each project fulfill its destiny of becoming an awesome garment that sees lots of wear, you'll be making the most of the initial investment you made in the materials. So why is this tactic more sustainable? Well, the fabric, patterns and notions will actually get used and have more likelihood of becoming useful, well-loved garments. Simply put, buying resources that don't get used is a waste. Okay, tactic number 2. Sew from your fabric stash. So I'm not suggesting that you never buy new fabric again, but I am suggesting that you pick a piece of fabric that's already in your stash and use that as the starting point for your next project. This tactic is so easy. It's actually easier than doing the alternative of going to buy some fabric. It requires negative effort. You just head to your fabric shelves or drawers or tubs or whatever and grab something that catches your eye. You don't even need to put your shoes on or fire up your laptop. I don't need to really explain why this saves you money. And as I say, I'm not suggesting that you do this for every single project until your stashes run dry, but even shopping from your fabric you already own every third project will have a significant impact on your budget pretty quickly. Obviously, you can cut your spending further still by using a sewing pattern you already own as well. But even if you choose to buy a new sewing pattern to make out of your chosen stash fabric, a pattern almost always costs less than the length of new fabric. So you'll be saving more than if you used a pattern you already own but bought a new length of fabric. So why it's more sustainable? Hopefully you already know this, but fabric production is an incredibly resource-hungry endeavour and creates a lot of damage and waste along the way. So we really need to help the fabric we buy fulfill its destiny of becoming a lovely garment that you enjoy wearing. And by using what already exists rather than shopping for more fabric, you're basically slowing down the production of new fabric and the extraction of more resources. And whilst we're talking about fabric and saving resources, let's get to the related third tactic. Buy less fabric than you need. Okay, so this one's a bit controversial. For this tactic, I'm suggesting you could simply buy less fabric than your pattern says you need. For example, if the pattern says you need 3 meters for the garment you want to make, you could buy 2.5 meters instead. But only do this if the fabric you have chosen is the same width or wider than the width suggested on the pattern. And don't do this if the fabric you want to use has a nap or directional print. So here's my reasoning for this controversial suggestion. Pattern designers always deliberately overestimate the amount of fabric you'd need to make their pattern. Not everyone that will be buying their pattern is skilled at the art of pattern Tetris. And many will not feel confident enough to veer away from the lay plan, which might allow the use of less fabric if they did. Those lay plans are only a guide. It's not possible for the designers to create a lay plan for every size and every possible width of fabric that's available. So they often have to group together sizes and create lay plans for standard widths of fabric, and then slightly overestimate. They also overestimate to account for some fabrics that shrink during a pre-wash. Some fabric can shrink by up to 10%. So if the designer suggested buying 2 meters with no wiggle room, then you pre-washed your fabric and it ended up being 1 meter 80 centimeters instead, there could be a problem. They don't want an inbox full of angry emails from customers saying that they didn't have quite enough of their lovely fabric. So they overestimate. I'd definitely advise looking at the lay plans if the designer has included them in the pattern, but use them as a guide, not something that you have to follow to the letter, and get creative with trying to position your pattern pieces differently. It's quite possible that simply making your own lay plan is all you need to fit the pattern pieces onto a smaller amount of fabric. However, you might find that this smaller amount isn't quite enough, and here's where you can get a little more creative. There are lots of options here, some of which will be more applicable to your project than others. So depending on the fabric, you might be able to cut some pieces on the cross grain. So cutting something on the cross grain means that you'll be positioning the pattern pieces so that the grain line that's printed on the pattern piece will be running perpendicular with the fabric selvage rather than parallel. Please don't do this if your fabric has any stretch, by the way. You can also create some additional seams if necessary. I once created a dress out of an improbable small length of fabric simply by creating a centre back seam rather than cutting it on the fold with no seam. So think about where you could put some seams where it wouldn't look weird, like, I don't know, like a kind of yoke levelled seam, definitely a centre back seam, or something where maybe splitting up half the bodice so it looks like it's kind of panelled. There's loads of options. Also, if there are features of the garment that you don't really need or like, such as inseam pockets, and if you're not a fan of those, you can omit them. That will save you some fabric because you don't need to cut out those pattern pieces. Plus, there'll be some pattern pieces that you could easily cut from other leftover fabrics that you have laying around. Pocket bags, facings, inside collars, inside cuffs, inside yokes. These are all pieces that you can cut from different leftover fabric that wouldn't even be noticeable in the finished garment. And of course, you could play with cutting some pattern pieces from different and contrasting scrap fabric that would be noticeable, such as the collar, button stand, cuffs, belt, yoke, even the sleeves or the skirt. So many options, and they'd all be helping you create a really unique garment. Obviously, with this tactic, the easiness comes from literally just asking for a smaller amount of fabric in the fabric shop, or ordering a bit less if you're buying online. Where it may feel like more effort is in the challenge that you then presented with. But honestly, I love these kinds of challenges, and I genuinely think that adding a tiny bit of additional head scratching to the making process brings more fun and creative fulfillment, and eventually more pride in the finished outcome. Why this tactic saves you money is obvious. You're literally ordering and paying for less virgin fabric. It could be a way for you to afford some super special or incredible quality fabric that otherwise might be outside your budget. And why it's more sustainable, similarly, you're purchasing fewer virgin resources. Okay, tactic number 4. Remake a sewing pattern that you've made before. Again, like with the sewing from your fabric stash, I'm not suggesting only doing this going forwards. I'm definitely not suggesting never buying a new sewing pattern again that you've fallen in love with. But now and again, remind yourself of the patterns you already own and keep those in consideration when deciding what to make from some lovely fabric. As you probably know, I fully recommend keeping track of the patterns that you already own. All of them, paper patterns, PDF digital patterns, magazines, and sewing books. There are heaps of methods, including various apps, to help you do this. But when you keep the list on the app or method of your choice, browsing through what you've already got will be just as easy, maybe even easier, than searching through the many sewing patterns out there online. So if you don't have a system in place for listing the sewing patterns you already own, that will require a little bit of effort. But if you love sewing, it's probably the fun kind of effort, you know. And once it's up and running, adding to it when you get a new pattern will be quick and easy. Aside from making the selection of a pattern more easy, actually making the project will be easier too. You will have already prepped your pattern, cut your size, and made any necessary adjustments. Just make sure to measure yourself again before you begin, just in case your measurements have changed a bit since the last time you made it. And because you've already had a chance to try on the finished pattern, you'll know if there's any additional alterations or tweaks that you think the pattern should have. You will already have followed the instructions, so you can get stuck in more easily, and you'll already know the bits that you found tricky, so you can keep an eye out for those. Basically, you're cutting out so much of the guesswork and uncertainty when you use a pattern you've worked on previously, even if you then make some additional changes or try a different view. Why this saves you money? Obviously, this will be saving you money because more of your projects won't require the purchase of a new pattern. Why it's more sustainable? For the same reasons really. More of your projects will be using a resource that already exists in the world rather than creating demand for more. Okay, tactic number 5. When buying a sewing pattern, if it comes in both paper and digital PDF formats, go for the PDF. So why is it easy? If the pattern company or the sewing shop's website sells both formats, then the buying process requires the same amount of effort. Why it saves you money? This is the thing. The vast majority of pattern companies that sell both versions will be selling their digital patterns for less than the physical version. Plus, buying a physical version online will also be more expensive because you'll have to pay for the postage. And if you bought the paper pattern in a bricks and mortar store, you'd have to get there somehow, so possibly involving a bus fare or petrol and parking costs. And even when you add the cost of printing out your digital pattern, so either on a home computer or in A0 format at a sewing shop or copy shop, it will most likely cost less than buying the paper copy would. Also, if you cut into a paper sewing pattern, then at a later date decide you want to make it again in a larger size, you'll have to buy the entire sewing pattern again. Whereas if you decided the same thing about a digital sewing pattern, you'll just need to reprint the pattern, not buy the whole actual thing again. There are yet more potential savings related to this tactic because we don't always make the sewing patterns that we buy. I'd really like to encourage you to wait to print out your digital sewing pattern until you're actually ready to make it, because it's possible that you won't. I've definitely got a few digital sewing patterns that I've paid to get printed out in A0, but I haven't actually made them yet. I still hope that I will, but if I don't, then that's money I wasted. So why spend more on a paper pattern that you might never get round to making, when you could pay less for the digital version that also won't take up actual physical space in your sewing area? So why it's more sustainable? This is a little bit nuanced. So honestly, I don't think there's much to be gained in terms of sustainability when it comes to paper versions versus digital versions that you're then printing out. About the same amount of resources will be used in either case, but not printing out a digital pattern that you never ended up using will definitely be more sustainable than buying the paper version that you don't end up using. So there you go. There's the 5 low effort tactics I have for you to help you save money on your sewing. Obviously, some will save more than others, some will require a bit more effort at some point, but they are all worth your consideration, I think. But there's one main overarching tactic that I'd like to leave you with. This will save you money, brain space, and some effort that could be used on doing some actual sewing. And it's this. Only buy the stuff for the project you're about to make. Don't speculate on future projects by buying some or even all of the stuff for those if you're not actually about to make them. You're a human, so there's a very good chance that you'll change your mind about some of those future projects before you get round to actually making them. Maybe a more suitable sewing pattern gets released in the meantime, or maybe you find a fabric you love even more than the length you bought a few months ago. And even if you do still love every aspect of the plan you came up with later down the line, it's incredibly likely that you'll still be able to get all of those elements to make it just as you imagined, or something very similar. Often, sewers feel like buying all the stuff is equivalent to buying the time you need to make it. But we need to acknowledge those really are separate things. And whilst we can't buy the time to actually sew, we can free up some by spending less of it shopping. As always, I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you do any of these things already? Do you have any other low-effort money-saving tactics to share? I'd love to do a follow-up episode on this in the future, so please get in touch, zoe@checkyourthread.com. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!